It's doop 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 doop. Yeah, go ahead and do that. And then, have you started the webinar?
I thought I did. Let's check and see.
Okay.
Yeah, looks like it has started.
Okay. All right. All right, go ahead.
All right. So for the expo in this panel, I just wanted to talk about utilizing the Reaper Minis in tabletop use. So for me, when I first discovered Reaper, it was based on tabletop needs. So as an avid RPG gamer, I was looking for miniatures to represent players' characters and came across Reaper online. I was blown away with the sculpts and with the assortment because I play a lot of different RPGs, finding miniatures that met some of my Western campaigns and fantasy, of course, and even sci-fi campaigns was extremely eye-opening and definitely appreciated. So I started purchasing Reaper like crazy and getting deeper and deeper into the miniature painting hobby. And I quickly noticed that as I was painting using some of my old school techniques, there was a lot of rub off and the details didn't really match some of the things that I'd seen online. So I did a lot of studying, a lot of looking at tutorials on the forums and on YouTube, and listening to a lot of the professional painters and some of their tips and tricks in how to better paint, but also make them a lot more resilient to how I use the miniatures on the tabletop. So the first thing that I really started to do was look at the paints themselves and making sure that I had the best paints, which came right alongside the Reaper Minis, and also really refined my techniques, learning how to do more layering and feathering, two-brush blending, and transitions of colors. That really allowed me to step up my painting game, but the wear on the table was still pretty noticeable. Diving into some of the finishing products like dull coats and really looking to see how I could better utilize added bits to bases to make them less fingered on the table. By utilizing a lot of the information that I found in the forums, I was able to really find a way to seal them well and not gum up the paint and not leave them misted over with a milky color. And to this day, those are really appreciated by my players. For my players, I paint a mini for each of their characters as we start new campaigns. Sometimes if they have a character leave the campaign one way or another and start a second character, I try to make sure that all of my players have a character represented on the board. And I do a couple of different things to use the wonderful sculpts because they're so detailed and really deserve to be on display bases. But making sure that they have a good paint job. I also pull a lot of information from the players themselves. I ask what their favorite colors are, their backgrounds for their characters, and I integrate those in different ways on the minis. So for instance, I have a current campaign, one of my current campaigns, the bases around the minis are all painted with the player's favorite color. Because we started the campaign and I hadn't yet completed all of the paint jobs, I wanted to make sure that they would be able to tell their minis from each other because we're doing virtual gaming. By painting the base of the miniature They're not only quickly identifiable to the players as they're on a battle map, but they can also utilize just that quick visual to plan their tactics, note distances, and really see where they're at in relation to the environment or any encounters that they're encountering. I also utilize those favorite colors into the paint job. So if they have a fighter, for instance, and their favorite color is orange, a lot of times orange is hard to get into colors like armor or things like that. So I look for bits and pieces that are sculpted on the miniature, whether it be some type of a sash or cape, anywhere that I can utilize that favorite color into the minis also kind of brings the player's eye to what the details are on the mini and really highlights their favorite color. So ties them in and really helps with them be more invested in the game.
It was too big for me to shove on my bottle cap.
Hello, how are you doing?
Lighting and stuff was good. The only issue, like you said, it just kept kind of focusing out of focus, but it wasn't like.
So the example I used was the Dwarven Mini, where I painted the base the color of the player's favorite. I utilized that in the hair and beard. So instead of having a gray dwarf, it's actually a red-headed dwarf. So there again, customizing the mini for the player is fantastic because it gives them that quick appreciation of that mini is painted specifically for them. Additionally, as I went through and tested a lot of different items to use on bases, to avoid some of the fingering of the mini, I found that if you use a rod and put a banner on a base, especially if they're a smaller miniature and don't take up as much of the base, that gives the player something to grab to move their mini without having them finger the mini and wear through some of that coat. And then if those minis are used a lot in a campaign, I make sure to reseal them pretty often. And again, I just use dull coat. You do have to be a little careful with that because if you're adding things like flock or static grass, you don't want that spraying up and covering up some of your paint jobs. So a lot of caution with that, but it's another way to extend the use of the miniatures on the table without having to worry about that paint rubbing off. For larger minis, I've found that the same principles apply. And again, the details that are sculpted into the minis, you can really highlight with the different colors. If you have someone who really has a, for instance, in Dungeons and Dragons, where their favorite enemy is a giant, their favorite color is orange, you can again utilize that color to kind of associate that with the player character. And it really takes on a good effect for the player as they're playing in your game. With Reaper, some of the biggest benefits I've found, aside from having different sculpts for different types of characters and monstrous races, being able to utilize them across different tabletop games, the overall ability to customize how you're spending your money on miniatures is great. For me, I utilize a lot of metal minis for my players. Again, it really has a lot more durability. Initially, the details were really great. But with bones, if you're a forever DM like I am, having a wide variety of minis to represent different types of monstrous races and beasts and even terrain pieces, the bones are a super affordable way to really make your dollar stretch and cover a wide assortment of minis. So for me, I would say probably 75% of the villainous or terrain pieces that I purchased from Reaper are in bones. And 100% of the players' minis that I purchase are in metal. With things like the Kickstarter, there are added benefits in that you get such a broad assortment and so many miniatures for an amazing price. It really is a great way to add to your collection of minis that you can use on the tabletop. Believe me, even though you think you may not need that 1 or 2 mini, there will be a time where the players will go left when you expect them to go right, and it'll come in really handy. I don't see any questions so far. Anybody have any questions?
Doesn't look like we have any so far, Joe.
All right. Excuse me. So again, as I'm using the miniatures in my gaming, again, I had hoped we would be a little more able to sit down and do wider tabletop gaming. Virtual has been a little bit more challenging, but I found that for tokens, you can actually, on several different virtual tabletops, you can actually upload images to represent for tokens. I found it's a great way to cover a couple of different needs in one fell swoop. So aside from, once you have your beautifully painted Reaper Mini, aside from using it for your challenge, you can also use those images for your virtual tabletop tokens and really highlight the paint job you did. And also, again, utilize the finished product in multiple different platforms. Really differentiates your tokens from others, especially if you're doing things like adventure leagues where you can be in and out of different games, have different players join in and out of different games. And it really allows you as a GM to kind of allow yourself to not be married to a stat block. So if someone attempts to do any type of metagaming and you thwart their plans, you've got a good visual representation that you created that shows that this isn't just the standard monster that you would be encountering. So for use on virtual tabletops, I found the Reapers really give, again, that added piece of, I hate to use the word professionalism, but it is a little bit more professional and shows that you're a real hobby enthusiast. By utilizing them for players, you can do the same thing. Or as you transfer pictures to your players, they can also upload those onto different platforms such as D&D Beyond, also tokens for virtual tabletops. There's really a plethora of opportunity for you as a hobby painter to spread your work onto the tabletop, whether that's in person or virtually. As you're prepping up with COVID-19, hopefully starting to dwindle down and be less havoc on our lives and gathering up into your table. I hope you used a lot of the time to do a lot of painting. I know I did. One thing to really have as an impressive piece to your players or to your dungeon master are having those miniatures painted, prepped, and ready to go. And again, by utilizing some of the tools that you'll find on Discord and some of the general chat, asking questions on the forums and the tutorials, there are so many options to make them very durable, personalized, and really stand out when you put them on a table, especially against some of the other manufacturers that are out there. Again, in my opinion, the sculpts really should be used for displays as much as possible. But as a gamer, I just can't break myself from using them on the tabletop. One of the biggest opportunities that I've found by utilizing the Reapers on the tabletop is a lot more satisfaction for my players in the games. A lot of people are very visual, and when you're utilizing whether it's battle mats or scenic terrain and miniatures on the table, I found that the average player is going to have more enjoyment and better immersion into the story and the game, especially when you're able to customize miniatures for them and for the encounters, which again goes right back into the broad assortment and so much help and tutorials on better painting and better end results to seal and have your miniatures prepped and ready to go for whether it's display or tabletop use. A lot of my players have really shown that as they get that miniature representing their character, they start to take their character a lot more serious as well. As they're looking at some of the details, it's kind of fun to see some of the ways that they emulate some of the gear that the miniatures are on or have with them. And whether that's through some of the game storytelling, they start looking for, maybe it's a scroll case that's painted on the miniature, maybe it's a cape that the miniature is wearing. When you start out, or when I start out a campaign and I'm prepping up miniatures for my players, because we haven't played, I don't know exactly what their character is like, what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be swapping armor or weapons. I really look at something that's just indicative of their kind of generalized class or profession. Once I do that and start painting, I let any storytelling elements that are going through, as well as, again, players' favorite color choices, start to lead me in directions for choosing colors, and then ultimately what I'm using on basing elements as well. By utilizing story elements and the players' interactions with you as the GM or other players, you can really start to fine tune both paint jobs and basing elements to make their character in miniature form really something that represents them as a player, but also their character. And again, by getting that mini on the table, having them more invested in playing, I found that this really helps with things like scheduling, where we all know life occurs and sometimes people can't help but to miss. I found by using miniatures, especially personalized miniatures that really speak to the players, the buy-in from the players to be able to be in the game and show up on time and actually participate and play just grows exponentially. As the players have that vested interest in the story, in the party, and in the scenarios that you're setting up, they almost get to where they feel if their miniature isn't on the table and they're not represented on the table, they as a player are actually missing out, which is true in a lot of ways. As we look at tabletop, if you miss a session, perhaps you're not getting experience or not participating in some type of a cliffhanger scenario that everybody down the road always remembers and comes back to. So by using those miniatures on the table, having them personalized to the players, just really helps your tabletop sessions get better buy-in, better participation, and better cooperation from your players. As we look at how to utilize some of the bones, how I use some of the bones for my monstrous races, I found that by deviating from some of the kind of published works, I've found a lot more opportunity in my players not questioning when things don't act according to their metagamed understanding. For instance, I'll have goblins that I'll paint some of them more green tone skin, some more red tone skin. And they've really come to understand that regardless of the goblins that I put down, they can't utilize metagaming because it could be something completely different from what they're used to in a monster manual, let's say. By utilizing the miniatures rather than just images, whether they're from online, from published materials, from your own favorite pin storyboards, by making slight variations and changes, it really opens up the world for you to say, because they're different, they're not the same. And again, this really drives some intrigue for the players, but as a painter for you, it really opens up the floodgates and allows you to do things that you've never dreamed before. Working with different skin tones, different color combinations, and really stretching yourself in ways that you wouldn't normally expect. And whether you paint more in the anime or chibi style or more in the kind of gritty, realistic tones, by allowing yourself the opportunity to be a little more fantastical in your paint, you're going to learn new techniques, and you're really going to stretch out how you utilize some of the miniatures that you place on the table. When I first started using minis more and more on my tabletop games, I also found it gave me a lot more appreciation for the games that I was running. I started thinking a lot more tactically, and as I focused on painting some of the miniatures, especially some of the miniatures that I would be using as encounter pieces for my players, it gave me a better opportunity to really think about both the characters' kind of backstory, their motivations. And I found the more time I spent painting, the more I was actually getting in line with some of the monstrous races or encounter pieces that I painted. As a GM, this was great because it allowed me to utilize creatures in different ways that I never kind of thought of. Things weren't just cannon fodder, whether they were kobolds or goblins, or whether it was just a man in black. I really started to utilize the time that I was painting to think more and more about what I was painting and how they would interact with the game. Even if they were minis that I did not plan to use for some time, or just painting without an end use in goal, I quickly found that I was writing myself notes in different notebooks to kind of represent what that character or NPC or monster kind of spoke to me while I was painting it. So as a GM, this really helped me in kind of making sure that I was more invested in the games, and really allowed me to open up and do better storytelling that my players then enjoyed, and we were able to visually see come to life with their PCs on the table, as well as the NPCs, monsters, terrain that I put on the table. So overall, the impact on just starting to purchase Reaper minis and starting to get better and better at painting and utilizing minis in the mini painting hobby has really impacted the game for not just myself, but players in many ways. One of the more interesting things that I found as we were playing at a gaming shop, and this goes back a couple of campaigns, but we got a lot of attention because people were more interested to see the minis that we had on the table. They were all different fantastic colors, items that you wouldn't expect to see on the table, kind of strewn together with the party. And we started getting quite a few people just stopping to see what minis we were using. For us, we use this as a good opportunity to start talking about the games that we were playing and start talking about not only the games that we were playing, but the hobby of mini painting. This led to a lot of opportunity for new players to enter the game, but also new people to start painting. If you're looking at doing any type of coursework or classes or anything at a community center or volunteering in any way, shape, or form, mini painting I found is a fantastic way for people to connect with each other and with you and really start opening up the door to expand the hobby. Minis are pretty detailed and can take a lot of time, but they're also a great way to start introducing people into the hobby because, like a coloring book, there are set lines and set bits and pieces on minis that are easy to follow when you start painting. You can visualize items, you can play with them on screen to do different colorizations and pre-planning what you need to paint. But then when you get that brush and actually start painting, just really opens up a floodgate, which leads to people participating in the community more. They're going to be asking a lot of questions. They're going to be looking for tutorials and help. They're going to be comparing minis to see how they can better their paint jobs or compare their paint jobs to others that are out there for similar models or similar fabrics or metals. And again, as I was painting, I noticed that quite a bit. I did a lot more discussion with community members and others who were into the hobby just to learn tips and techniques and tricks and how they kind of approached some of the models that they painted, where they got some of their inspiration and why. So for me, it really helped break down a lot of the anxieties that I had in dealing with other people, especially strangers. I've found that as you have that kind of soft approach in your games, as people are coming up to check things out, it's a great way to find an opportunity to talk to people who may also have some type of social anxiety and have a hard time talking to people. By talking about miniatures and painting, it's a very approachable piece, a lot more than some of the games. It's something that a lot of people can quickly and easily understand, and generally they won't feel too out of place talking about things like paint and different miniature models. One of the last items that I really think using the miniatures in your tabletop games impacts in a big way. We talked a lot about the visual drawing people in, the personalization, making your players feel welcome, for yourself to have a collection of miniatures that you can lay down at a moment's notice. But one of the biggest things for me personally, and I hope for others out there, is by utilizing the miniatures in a tabletop game, you're really opening yourself up to start looking at things in a different way. Mentioned a little bit about thinking about the people or the NPCs or monsters in a different way, but as your party of players are approaching scenarios, utilizing miniatures and terrain and battle mats really it requires them to do more thinking. In the early days, a lot of times in my gaming, experience. We didn't have battle mats or maps. We had to map things out as we went. And a lot of times it was easy for us to just say, let's go to the next area. By having items laid out on a tabletop, whether you have full diorama terrain and you're unveiling pieces as they have that fog of war kind of showing what's around, but the party dynamic themselves really starts to take more of a front. The team itself of your players really start to gel a lot more than just using theater of mind. As they're seeing their marching orders, what's ahead, what's around them, they start utilizing tactics a little bit more and working as a team to, whether it's impact the environment, thwart encounters, or even just go up and muscle down bad guys. The players themselves, as they're seeing their miniatures utilized and positioned on a tabletop, start thinking more tactically because they can visually see it. And again, whether it's on a virtual tabletop or an in-person tabletop, when they're able to see their mini that they've got some vested interest in because it's personalized, whether they painted it or you painted it, they have a lot more ambition to make sure that their miniature really gets through that scrape. Because as a vested person, you want to make sure that your character, your mini that's on that table gets through and you're able to put it back up on the display base or display shelf so you can bring it back the next week to utilize on the tabletop. Some of the, let's see, we've got just over half an hour. So some of the different ways that I utilize prepping minis for the tabletop, again, because I use a variety of metal minis and bones. Of course, the final coats are very important and really need to be maintained and upkept, especially if you're at an in-person game and moving miniatures around battle mats or terrain. As I'm prepping the minis and looking at items put on the bases, again, if it's a player's mini, I look at ways that I can bring in player favorite pieces or colors. For some of the monstrous things, try to keep them more in an element. Again, it shows that visual display of what that character is kind of environmentally like. Frost giants, I'm going to put them on a snowy base. Fire giants, I'm going to put them on a cracked lava base. A lot of the beasts, I'm going to put on some type of a scenic base that has bits of forest or rocky terrain, some type of arid, deserty terrain. By utilizing those type of aspects, I'm able to really dictate the environment of the story, even though it may be different, again, as we make things personalized and variant to keep our players guessing. But I'm also doing the same with the player characters. It's super easy if you're doing a Dwarf Fighter, for instance, to put them on a more rocky base, and an elf to put them on a more grassy base with a little bit of moss or vine, something to show that nature. With some of the monstrous items, I'm putting little bits down there. So a rust monster, I may have a bit of a sword from a swap, put that down there and paint it all rusted up and corroded. By adding in those little details, again, those are a lot of ones that as people approach and look at your table, they're not going to see. But as your players are really focused on the game mats, on the tabletop itself, those are the bits that they're really going to appreciate and really note the time and attention to detail that you put into it. Or if you're painting for your tabletop, your GM is really going to take note of those pieces and appreciate. By utilizing different elements on the base and continuing that opportunity of personalization of your mini. Again, you can have multiple minis and have them be from different environments and really change up the way the players are looking at the game mat. I see no questions yet. So for the miniatures that I utilize on my tabletop, one of the last things that I really try to do is look at mini exchanges. The forums are a great example. If you're able to get onto Reaper Mini and check out the forums, they have gift exchanges or mini exchanges. Fantastic opportunity. If you're ever in a pinch or you have too many of something, the exchanges are a great way to make sure that you have the minis that you need, or to help others find minis that they need. With myself as a forever GM, I'm always in need of villainous races and monsters. And I always find I have too many of the heroic pieces. So making sure you have a good balance of what you have and what you need. Great opportunity to continue that community spirit of exchanging ideas and talking about different techniques and how to really customize things and to make them your own, continue to improve. Mini exchanges are a great way to make sure that you have the assortment of minis that you want to use to represent your table. If you're doing a Western theme and you don't have enough to represent whether it's the village that the party is going to, or a new bad guy that's really going to set the scene, checking out the mini exchanges is a great way to quickly and easily make sure you have an opportunity to swap out minis. And again, start to utilize some of that customization and community to really look at ways to alter minis, change out minis with something that you need, or even just offer minis that you don't have a need for. One of the best things that I've found with being in the Reaper community is that community itself. All of the participants that I've ever worked with, whether it was asking a question, whether it was doing an exchange, whether it was just talking about bones when the next bones is going to come out, the community itself is very supportive, and ultimately everybody's in it for the same thing. It's a love of the minis, it's a love of painting minis, and there is a strong element of love of gaming. As you're working on painting minis, whether you're new to Reaper and this is your first exposure at the expo, whether you've done it for years, whether you use them on the tabletop or not, for me, I strongly recommend it for so many opportunities to drive immersion, bring players back to the table week after week, drive your own creativity, and really feed your own habit. Because if you're using your Reaper minis on the tabletop, you have to have them to represent the encounters and NPCs and villains that you're presenting to your players. It's kind of an open license on why you need more and more minis. And I see we've still got some time and no questions. Let me do just a couple of examples. I don't have my camera set up with an overhead, so I'm going to try to use this one for some of the minis that I use on my tabletop. So we'll try. I know the lighting is not good here. But this here is one of my characters minis, one of my player characters minis. Oh yeah, that just is horrible lighting. I apologize. That is a Dwarf Fighter who the player, his favorite color is orange. So the base, of course, is orange. The beard, he's a redhead instead of gray beard. But some of the details on this one, and this is the Dwarven King, has these fantastic sculpted details of what could be jewels or gems in the shield and throughout some of the bits of his armor that are just round. The player himself is a photographer. So I actually painted those to represent the lenses of cameras. So again, a good way to tie in player interests with the miniature that you're painting for them. Let's see, the Frost Giant, that one will show up better because it's light colored. So this one here, I really experimented a lot more with color, and I don't know how well that's going to show up. But the skin tones, I didn't want straight blue for the skin tone. I knew the base was going to have lots of blues for ice. So I actually played around with just adding a bit of blue in with some drow triad. And I really love the effect. I love the way it came out. There again, it's a complete differentiation from what you normally see on a Frost Giant. But for me, as I utilize that in the game, I'm really able to say that this is different from what the regular Frost Giant would have for stats. It really gives me a point of differentiation if any of my player characters, which luckily I don't have any rule lawyers. If I did, if they were to attempt to challenge anything that the Frost Giant had to do for story elements of the game, you'd go back and say, well, obviously he's not blue, he's not a Frost Giant. Let's see, for a rust monster, this one here, I tried to utilize more oranges and browns and yellows, just because as I think of rust, that orangey brown color really comes to mind. But I added in lots of yellows because as I thought of kind of those orangey plates rubbing, if it were a bug moving around and rubbing, yellow is just a general lighter color from orange as some of that red fades out and scrapes away. Big kudos actually to Lynn Stahl, who covered a lot of the color theories at my first ReaperCon. For a Goblin, again, I know the light here is not great, so again, I apologize. I didn't think I'd be showing as many minis. But for a Goblin, that one I have a red cloak on and painted him kind of green skinned. That one, I used the red and he's got little bits of purple around, so I can utilize him, and the players can quickly see with those vibrant reds and purples that he is more than just the standard Goblin. And when I break him out, I usually do use him as a Goblin boss versus just a standard Goblin that I won't put those brighter colors on. And, oh yeah, we still got a lot of time. This one here is just a half-elf paladin, and you can see the colored base. This is a player's mini, and you can always tell the player minis because of the colored base. But the plate allowed me to do some freehand, which again is something that I really try to challenge and struggle still, but challenge myself to improve as often as I can. This mini, because he is his background is really about a soldier background. The armor itself is very, very dark in color for kind of representing a dark background. And then as you get closer to surface details, everything is lighter and lighter as he's starting to change his own destiny and become more and more in tune with peace. So again, kind of customizing character details and adding player flair to it. The final mini itself is a blend of the player and the character, which the player has not had a chance to actually hold that many yet. I'm really excited for when we do get around the table and he's able to, just so he can see some of those details and hopefully it really speaks to him. And let's see, finally, so a bugbear. This one here I thought was fantastic. Now, I did not paint this mini. This was actually off of the exchange. So I had gone on and signed up for an exchange. And as you fill out a questionnaire, you just say what you're willing to paint and what you're looking for. Me, I'm willing to paint just about anything. And all I want is some type of monstrous race. So I thought, again, for the community, it was fantastic. They did a beautiful job on this. This was actually one boot. And I believe 3 years ago that we did this exchange and really nailed it and hit it out of the park. It did a fantastic bugbear. And because I was not able to use the model in person this last session when we did, it hasn't been seen for a couple of years. But again, when you put that down on the table, the differentiation from that bugbear to some of the bugbears that I've painted really allowed the players to focus and say, that one's different. We've got to focus on that one and really do something. So for me, utilizing that differentiation of painter was really great to use as a different type of encounter. My players really picked up on it fast and knew that something was different about that. Of course, I had a different stat block as that was a boss, and really had a great engagement by utilizing that one different bugbear among a few others that I had painted. So a lot of focus and attention from my players just on those subtle differences. Let's see, a final piece. So I don't do a lot of display minis. Yeah, this is not, I apologize again. So when I do a display mini, many of the ones that I do, I prep up for tabletop use if they're not going on a fancy display base. This was actually a commission and utilized the person's favorite colors and used a marble floor painting technique to show this beautiful, beautiful woman in a fancy gown on a marble floor. So again, utilizing these types of opportunities in so many different Reaper pieces to appeal to a lot of different people has really let me, again, connect with people that I never would have in the past, and really given me an opportunity to break down some of my social anxiety, because it's super easy for me to talk to just about anybody about miniatures, about painting, and how to kind of bring those elements into what I'm a lot more self-conscious of, my tabletop gaming. And still a little bit of time. I don't see any questions, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. I had to add on a bit there at the end, so I apologize if it kind of went out of left field. I do hope everybody's having a fantastic ReaperCon. I know I am. Some of the classes have been amazing. Or Reaper Expo, I apologize. ReaperCon coming in September.
What's your faction pick, Joe?
Ooh. Archon. I had a hard time picking actually because I was going back and forth so much that it was just a last minute decision. I was like, what speaks to me the most? Because the descriptions alone, they're all so good. Whoever writes those is just like, they're really on it.
They did a really good job.
Who's winning so far? Has anybody been tallying?
I'm pretty sure it's Archon.
I hope so. I hope so. But you know, like ReaperCon itself, in some ways, it's kind of nice that, you know, kind of from the back, one of the smaller ones really gets ahead. So I always like the underdog too.
Oh, absolutely. Right now, I think the underdog might be Rude Tarky.
I've seen a lot of chatter just for Rutarki, but yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see as the day closes how much interaction everybody's doing with it.
We hope so. We hope it gets a lot of hype and people really enjoy the factions.
Yeah, definitely a lot of fun. Definitely a lot of fun. Well, I know we're a little early, but if I don't see any other questions, gosh, I'm trying to think. So this evening, I've actually got a class on basing. And then today's schedule was just so packed. There's so many good things. I had a hard time kind of choosing what I went into. But if anybody is interested, on the Reaper forums, I go by Cerebro 1974. On Discord, I just go by Joe. And if you're ever interested in whether it's exchanges, just talking about games, talking about painting, and talking about minis, getting ready for Bones 5 deliveries, or I guess receipt, and then shipping, but then kind of talking about thoughts for Reaper 6 Bones, I'm always game. So if anybody needs anything, don't hesitate, reach out. I love to share with the community. It's far and away the best thing that, in my opinion, that Reaper's offered so many people, just the community opportunity for us to share and gather and participate with the company in such a big way. Something I've never seen from another company. So fantastic.
Thank you, Joe. And for anyone interested in his ground effect basing for beginners, that is at 8 o'clock in classroom 1.
And then before this one ends, the code is 94717. 94717 is the code if you want the green leaf badge. It's a green oak leaf. If anybody needs to know, it's a green oak leaf. 94717. And of course, you can get that badge at tonight's as well. And I hope everybody enjoys their Reaper Expo as much as I have. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. Love to chat with you.
Thank you, Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then I'm just making sure that for the record.